Welcome to the Studio Chat podcast. My name is Barbara Thompson. Each week, I'll be bringing you a self-care expert or a message to help you to discover how to live your best life and understand your mind-body connection. This month, I'm going to be dedicating each and every episode to my beautiful dog, Maisie, who passed away a month ago. She was my self-care ambassador for my business, but also on every single podcast for the last 52 episodes. She has been right by my side for each and every episode I've recorded and with all of my guests. And one thing I've learned about love and unconditional love is something that Maisie showed me. She showed up every day for me. It didn't matter what I was doing, how I looked, how I felt. That beautiful dog was just my best mate, and she was always there. And it has led me in these last 4 weeks to a journey of healing, discovering more about myself, learning how to process my feelings through grief, but also just learn more about myself. And this dedication is for you, Maisie, and this month, every episode is about healing, about spirituality, and about anything that I think that my girl would like you to hear. So, sending big love to my Maisie. I miss you a lot, and these episodes are just for you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this really special episode today. I have been looking forward to this one. As you would know, or may not have known, my beautiful dog Maisie passed away about 48 days ago. And during this time, I was searching for things to really help me grieve. Obviously, I'm still grieving, and to find tools and different modalities to help support me through this really difficult time. And I came across this beautiful woman who I've got on my podcast today called Beth Bigler. She is from Honoring Our Animals. And if you go along to her Instagram page and follow her story, how she shows up every day on her Instagram, providing beautiful tools to help you, whatever stage you're at, just because your animal's just passed away, or they're really sick and their time is coming soon, or you've got a puppy. That day may come, or you've got a neighbor or a cousin, or your husband and wife is having to say goodbye to a beloved animal. This is why I'm so honored to have Beth join me on my podcast today.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Barbara.
Hi, it's so right. Well, let's get into it. So, guys, Beth she's a double certified Pet Loss Grief Counsellor, a certified Pet Chaplain, and a certified end-of-life animal companion doula. I hadn't heard of any of those things. So can you walk us through what those things are and how you got into doing this?
Well, sure thing. So when I identify myself to most people, I just say I'm a pet loss grief counselor. That's kind of the big umbrella, right? Most of us have heard of grief counseling for humans when we have a human loss. And I do the same sort of work, but with an emphasis on animal loss. So basically, I work with people, individuals, families, couples, before, during, and after the loss of their animal companions. So basically, all those certifications mean is that I have studied and trained to be a grief support for animal death and also for human death. I wouldn't have had to do a certification for humans, but the thing is, many of my clients, all of us, as we go through life, we are also experiencing human loss, whether we have experienced it before, or maybe it's happening, or we have anticipatory human loss, or sometimes even when I'm working with clients about their animal, they have a human loss. And all grief stirs up other grief. So I thought it was really important to be versed not just in animal loss, but in human loss. So that's those. And then many of my clients have spiritual questions or spiritual instability when their animal dies. They're not sure if what their religious teachings are, if the religious teachings apply to the afterlife for animals, or maybe someone has no spiritual or religious life, but suddenly they have questions about having one. It doesn't really matter where anyone falls on the gamut. A lot of times spiritual questions come up. So that's why I did some training about chaplaincy. And then the end of life animal companion doula piece is really about my anticipatory work. I work extensively with people who are preparing to say goodbye to their animals. They have a diagnosis or they know the time is coming. And so that training is just designed to help me be more of a support as my clients walk with their animals to the completion of their lives.
We're very lucky we've got someone like you in the world. So is this something that as a little girl you wanted to do, or something that you've stumbled across?
Well, I'm not sure anyone wakes up in the morning as a kid and is like, I want to work with dead pets all day. No. But I did, of course, always love animals. I had a very tender spot for animals. When I was a kid, I couldn't even watch animal movies like Benji or even E.T. because whenever the animal would get into peril, I would cry and get very upset. So I actually had trouble even watching animal movies because even if it was a funny movie, the animal would always get in trouble and I would get scared. So I definitely had a fondness for animals my whole life. But I was a writer as a kid, and I was a playwright. I started out writing plays and poetry. And long story short, I ended up working in Hollywood. I ended up being a writer and producer in Hollywood, working in scripted film and television and unscripted film and television. So I had a big, nice, happy career in Hollywood. And in the middle of that, my 11-year-old soulmate cat named Arnie got a very bad prognosis on a cancer. And I was blindsided and scared, and I just couldn't imagine living in a world without him. I actually did not want to live in the world if he was going to die. And I also felt that he was so young, and why was this happening? And I was spiraling. So I looked for support. I found an incredible pet loss grief therapist in LA who was kind of at the end of her career, but agreed to take me on. And she started working with me on the anticipatory side of things. And then as we were doing that and I was doing that work and it was so profound, it was so helpful, I instantly felt like, okay, I'm going to be able to step up for Arnie. I'm going to be able to give him a good death. And I might even be able to continue on after. I wasn't so sure, but I knew I could get him to a good death. We also were mounting a medical fight. We tried a chemo experiment with him because cats and chemotherapy, a lot of times you don't really know if it's going to work. And it worked. And we got a remission. It was like a miracle. So we were really excited about that. But, I kept working with my pet loss grief person because I still had more to discover about the relationship. I still wanted to learn more about my own anxiety around it. I was nervous. Will the cancer return? Will my other animal get sick? I had a lot of fear. So I kept doing the work and I was profoundly impacted by it. I then had the experience of meeting somebody in a veterinary waiting room who unfortunately was going to have to euthanize her cat that day. And I somehow, once she told me what was going on, I somehow just felt like I knew what to do. I knew how to step in. I knew how to support her. I stayed with her the whole day. And I know I helped her life that day, but she has no idea how much she helped mine. Because throughout that experience, I was realizing, oh, this is what I want to do. I got to help people. I want to help people who are in that kind of pain. I want to help people feel like they can make it through, even when they don't believe themselves they can make it through. But I was like pretty entrenched in my Hollywood career. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do it when I retire or something. I don't know. I didn't know how I would start. And unfortunately, a year after Arnie's first diagnosis, we did the 1-year scan. We got all the ultrasounds, blood work. He looked great. He had no cancer in his body. He was doing really well. But about a week after all those results came in, he wet the bed when he was sleeping in bed next to me, and he kind of sat in it, which was very unusual for him. And I rushed him to the vet, and he wasn't eating, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And several days later, we figured out what was going on, and what was going on was a totally different cancer, not the one he had before, had overtaken his perfect, beautiful body and completely had ravaged his system, and there was no fight we could have. And so we had to euthanize him. And I was stunned. I was blindsided. And I was grateful that I had done all that anticipatory work because I was able to give him a good death. But I was totally devastated. And it was because of that that I thought, you know what? I'm not going to wait till I retire. I'm not going to wait and do this someday. I'm going to do it right now. So I just started taking steps to totally change my life completely, started my training and certifications, opened my practice. And years later, here we are. This is what I do full time, all day, every day, working with clients and, of course, supporting my Instagram community as well.
Thank you for, I have no words, and that's very rare for me. It really touched me. And anyone that has had a pet or owns a pet, I think listening to this, I just want to give it that grace and a bit of just time for this beautiful purpose and story to unfold in people's hearts, and just to hear this career that you've had. You've gone from Hollywood, which is very, I guess, suck it up and keep pushing on. And I can't imagine the work hours that you would have done, and the none of us that haven't worked in Hollywood, the pressure and the deadlines, I would imagine, is just next level. And that's why part of why you do it. And coming home to Arnie and coming home to that is, again, that unconditional love piece, that you're perfect just the way you are. And just those two worlds meeting, and then just how you happened to meet that one lady, and that one lady in LA that just changed your life, and then that woman in the waiting room at the vets that changed your life, and then having to say goodbye to Arnie the way you did changed your life. Like, isn't it just fascinating how, wouldn't have been fascinating at the time? And even I'm sure now it still is. I was watching it, it's still, grief is still there. It doesn't ever leave us, does it?
Never. Never. I will grieve Arnie every day until I die. And perhaps after then too. I'm not sure what happens after, but I will grieve him every day. But I am grateful. I'm grateful for his life. I'm grateful for the gifts he gave me when he was Earthside. And I'm grateful that we get to do this work together now. I truly feel that I'm honoring Arnie every time I help somebody, I work with somebody, every time I get a DM on Instagram saying, this post got me through my day today. I feel like that's all the love, the care, the consideration, that acceptance that Arnie showed me. I now get to give that back to thousands of people. And that's the best way I can live his legacy. And in many ways, I feel like this is a total collaboration between us. We're still doing it together. We're still doing life together, just looks a little different. And that has truly been a gift to my grief and to my life.
And that's what I love about you, that through what you do with your work, you encourage people to keep the bond. Just because the animal's not here with us, you really encourage us to build that relationship. It just looks a little bit different, but that animal's still with you, and and always with you.
100%. They're an ancestor in our family now. And so we keep them included as such. They can remain included in your everyday routine. They can remain included at holidays. They can remain included in big celebratory moments, and they can remain included in your deepest, darkest moments. If we intentionally connect with them, bring them in, remember them, say their name, do things in their honor, carry their legacy, celebrate their milestones, they are always with us, and your relationship can deepen and evolve. I tell people this all the time. I feel that my relationship today with Arnie is stronger. It's deeper. I'm still learning from it. I'm still getting lessons from it, even more so than when he was here. And I thought that was just me, but then I started working with clients, and hundreds of clients later, I now know, oh, it's everybody. Everybody can do this, but sometimes we don't know how. We don't know how to navigate it. And we're so upset and we're so devastated that the idea of like continuing the relationship feels overwhelming. And so sometimes that's where I come in.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing too, because anyone listening to this, I know this is an episode that people want to keep coming back to. They may listen to it, and then when they do have to say goodbye to a beloved pet, they may join us again here. And today is just a first conversation that Beth and I are having, because I tell you what, the list that I've sent her of things I wanted to talk about, it was mammoth. And that goes to show how big pet grief is, how we've got so much to talk about it, how it's not talked about, and how it's such a confusing time. Because I can resonate with you that when I've had 3 animals in my life, in my adult life, that have now passed, and I'm going to just share that story briefly with people, and they're all very different. But the second one that I can really resonate with you, I had a rescue pug, and her name was Floss. And when she passed, I had a very dark time where I didn't want to be here anymore. And that's such a tough thing when you're someone that has never had those thoughts before. And like, life is hard, but it really threw me, because all I wanted to do was be with her. And I had little Maisie at the time looking at me, and I was like, well, I can't really. So she, that little one saved my life. And I don't say that lightheartedly, but it's just interesting that I know I've had that feeling of I just want to be with them. And it's such a something you don't share with other people. Because the words that get chucked around is, oh, it's just an animal, it's just a pet. You'll be right, mate. It's very surface level. It's, for some of us, our pets are our family, or our children, our true connection to unconditional love. And it hits differently. You may have had a parent or someone die, and this hurts more. And our brains can't comprehend. We feel stupid. We feel silly. Like, why are we really grieving and mourning the loss of an animal more than we did with our uncle or our cousin or our mother or something, all right, so just briefly, I want to introduce you to my 3 pets. So my first
Please.
one
Yes, I want to hear about them. Say their names.
Yeah, so my first one was, I actually didn't really want any animal. I was brought up around animals, so I always had a family dog and a family cat for like 15 or 16 years. But into my 20s, I never once was like, oh, I really want a dog, or I really want to get a cat. They all fell into my life. So one of my friends, when I was with my ex-husband at the time, I was at my friend's house, and she's like, oh my gosh, our cat's pregnant. It's having kittens. Do you want one? And I was like, yeah, maybe. And then all of a sudden we went over, and there was a little ginger guy, and he was like so tiny. And my ex-husband at the time, he was a bodybuilder, and this little tiny cat crawled up onto his shoulder and just sat on his shoulder. And we were like, well, he looked at me and was like, can we take him home? And I was like, oh, okay, all right. So we had him for, I want to say, about 4 or 5 years. And he was just like a dog. He would wait at the bottom of the driveway for us to come home. And then he'd, like, if I got home first, he'd greet me, walk up, and then go back down and wait for my ex-husband, and then come back down. And he was just the most cruisiest cat ever. He was just
amazing,
just wonderful. And our neighbors, he would always come home smelling of perfume. And one day, one of our neighbors caught up with us, and they were like, oh, is that your big, because he was a big, massive ginger cat. And they were like, is that your ginger cat that looks like a teddy bear? Is that yours? And we said, yeah. And we said, he always comes home smelling of perfume. She goes, oh, I hope you don't mind. I give him heaps of snuggles and kisses. But the wife said, do you know what he does all day? And we were like, we don't know where he is. They had a chicken coop, and he used to go and sit in the chicken coop and hang out with the chickens. And I was just like, are you sure there's not one missing? And she was like, no, Barbara, Chester loves it. He just sits in there all day and hangs out with the chickens. And then at night time, he comes and has dinner with us, and I give him heaps of cuddles, and then he comes home to you.
Wow.
This was his personality. And then a few years later, I bought a pug for my mum, because my mum had always
what's his name? What's Ginger Cat's name?
His name was Chester.
Chester. Okay, Chester. Yeah. All right, Chester.
Yeah. So he was a big personality. And then a few years later, it was my mum's 50th, and she had always wanted a pug. And we found, long story short, we got very ripped off, and it was a bit of a dodgy breeder. And this dog was a year old. She had actually been homed out to a drug dealer's home. And then she actually got sent back to the breeder, because the breeder found out her name was Floss, and she got back to the breeder, and she was all ribs and maggots, and her eyes were severely scratched. And so I knew about the eye scratch business. And when we went to buy her for the mum, the breeder said, hey, look, you have to have cyclosporin drops. You have to have drops in her eyes for the rest of your life, like her life. Is that okay? Because it's going to cost a little bit. So I had to break the surprise, and I rang my mum and said, hey, look, we're going to get you a pug. And she was all excited. I said, no, before you get excited, she needs this medical attention. Are you okay? She was like, yes. To be honest, when I first met Floss, she's the love of my life, I didn't like her, because I would, when you walk with your hands down by your side, she would jump up and nip my hands. And I hate dogs or cats that bite or nip. And I was saying to my ex-husband, oh, I don't like this dog. Like, and isn't it interesting? I was like, oh, she's nippy. And my mum had her for a few months, And it just didn't work out. Every time I would go see her, my mum would always say comments like, oh, it's your bloody dog, it's your dog. And I was like, no, it's not. And in the end, I got a phone call one day and she said, can you come and pick up this dog? I can't afford its eye drops anymore. And we were renting at the time, so I had to check that it was okay. And I'll never forget the first time Chester met Floss, because a pug looks different. And as my pug walked across the the glass sliding doors, my cat looked at it, Chester looked at it and was like, oh my God, what the hell is that? Like, I remember him just going, what is this? And then so Floss was introduced into our family, which was just beautiful, it was all about her. She didn't think she was a dog, and her and I had a special bond. Very special bond, to the point one day my ex-husband said, he's not my ex-husband because of this, but he said to me, we were so close, Floss and I, one day we were watching TV, and he goes, Barbs, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. And he goes, I mean, it's such a stupid thing to ask me, but he's like, if Floss and I fell off the cliff at the same time, who would you save first? And obviously I said Floss straight away, and he got really shitty about that. But anyway, so I had her for a few years. I want to say about 5 years again. And I just looked at her one day and I thought, because I would really not baby her, but we were very, very close. And I thought, dogs need a little friend. And I just happened to look onto the site. It wasn't planned. I just looked onto this like generic for sale type page in New Zealand, and saw Maisie as a puppy. And I turned the iPad to my ex-husband, and he was cooking dinner or something. And it was really off the cuff. So you can see none of my animals are really planned. And I was like, look at this cute puppy. I was kind of testing him. Like, I didn't think he'd say yes. I was like, it's cute. And he goes, oh, do you want it? Like, do you want it? I went, oh, what? He said, why don't we go meet her tomorrow? And I went, oh, okay.
Amazing.
So
wow.
She was my first puppy. So you can see these three animals were bought together. So you got Chester, Floss, and Maisie. Now, soon after, a couple of months after I got Maisie, my marriage ended. So I ended up taking the three animals with me. Wouldn't have had it any other way. Luckily, I always found a rental property, but the story started. Why have you got the three animals? They're costing you a fortune. I got offered a job in Paris soon after that. I didn't actually want the job anyway. Like, nothing. They were my family, and I was so close to all of them, and I couldn't imagine a life without them. Like, yes, I could have gone to Paris, someone else could have looked after them, but all three of them had my heart by then. Like, I could not have picked them up. And so it's just interesting. A lot of comments from people, a lot. I can't emphasize that enough. They're holding you back, they cost too much money, they're only animals, why don't you go live your life, yada, yada, yada. Then Chester was 9 when he passed away. And what happened one morning, I'm very lucky with all three of my animals that I've been there for all of their deaths. And this was my first time that I'd seen anything dead in my life. I hadn't my grandparents passed, but I was never allowed to see them. So I was getting ready for work one day, just been to the gym. I remember I had porridge, typical Barbara Styles. I spilt porridge all down the front of my top that morning. And I went into the spare room, and he was sitting on the bed, and he nuzzled me, and I was like, hey, buddy. And I went to turn the shower on, and then I must have got the wrong towel. And I remember going, oh, this isn't the wrong towel. Turned the shower off, walked into the spare room. And then all of a sudden he was lying funny on the floor, and Floss and Maisie were like they thought he was playing. And I got down on my hands and knees. I was like, and then him and Maisie were best friends. They were best buds. And then I was like, guys, stop playing. And then for some reason I got on my hands and knees, and I was like, Chester, what are you doing? And all I got out of him was 3 breaths. His tongue hung out and he'd gone. So I screamed out to my neighbor, who was my landlord at the time, help me. I was just, what? I think I knew he had died, but I didn't really know what to do. And because he was so big and he hadn't been to the vets for a while, all I remember was she was backing the car out. I couldn't lift his body. It actually made me want to vomit a little bit. I couldn't touch him. So I had to cover him in a towel, because I knew I had, time was paramount. I kind of knew in my gut he was gone, but I had to be the best mum I could in that moment. I just had to suck it up, come on, Barbs. And I remember talking, come on, Barbs, come on, mate, come on. And I got the towel and scooped him up, and he wouldn't fit in the cage because he was so big. So I had to just try and put him in as best as I could. And I was just like, you big bugger, because he was such a big cat. And I was trying to put him in the cage. And Floss and Maisie were right there. And I said, girls, I think it's time to say goodbye to your brother. I don't think he's coming home. Like, and they sniffed the cage. It was cool. Like, they got to, and then I remember going up to the vets, and then, I was just a mess. And I remember the vet coming out, and she said, I'm really sorry, Barbara, he's passed. Like, he was, and I lived a 30-second drive away from the vets. Like, it was literally just around the corner. And she said, do you want to say goodbye? I said, yep. And it's so interesting. If anyone can resonate with this, in this death, in this passing, the door opened and I saw his beautiful body lying there. And the whole vet clinic was full at this time. So picture me, I've got my oatmeal down my front, and my neighbor came with me. And when I saw his body, I ran into the corner. There was a corner of the room, and I faced the corner, and I just said, I can't do this. I can't. Like, the little girl in me, I literally just ran into a corner, faced the corner. I can't do this. I just remember losing it. And then she finally got me into the room, and the vet said, just take your time. And I remember looking at a anatomy poster of something on the wall, looking at him, looking at the anatomy poster, looking at him in my brain. And she said, I know, Barbara, it's just happened, so take your time. And it was just kind of like, I had a cat 5 minutes ago, and now my cat's dead because he had a heart attack. She said he had a severe heart attack, and there was nothing I could do. Right. So he was just lying in front of me. Again, it was the first dead thing I'd seen. So he was lovely and peaceful, but how to get your head around that? Like, he was fine 1 minute, and the next minute he wasn't there. And it was just, I was like, can I have done anything? Could he got any scans? And she said, I just think it was just his time. Like, and they normally vomit and they normally poo or he didn't do any of that. His tongue just came out and he just passed. And I was at home, and Floss and mate, we were all together. We were all there. And when his ashes came back, I'll never forget this, 2 or 3 days later, this is the first time I had started to get a bit spiritual, but not as much as with Floss. I lit a candle, had his ashes there. I sat there, had a photo of him. Floss sat on one side of me. Maisie sat on the other side of me. And we just talked about him. I was there for 2.5 hours. And they sat there with me the whole time.
Beautiful. Good for them.
It was the first time that I had experienced that. And that was just so rough. And then the second time when I had to say goodbye to an animal was Floss. And her and Maisie came from New Zealand to Australia. And Floss passed away when she was 12 and a half. And maybe a year before that, she had a collapsed trachea, early congestive heart failure, and something else. So, she had a few little bits and pieces going on. And a week before she passed, it was a Saturday night and it was dark. And she went outside to the toilet. And this is what I mean. I'm just so lucky I was there for the whole time. And I heard some scuffling and some noises. And I went outside and saw her on her back. Now, for a pug to be on their back, that's a little bit weird. So she was actually having a seizure, and it was actually a mini stroke. So I went and I did all the wrong things because I didn't know. I just saw her and thought, first of all, because it happened so quick, like she turned on her back, and then I went to pick her up. And as I picked her up, I had bare feet on and I stood in dog shit. So that was fun. That squished between my toes. And then obviously I've got all my neighbors around. So I was trying to be quiet because I was like, oh my God, Chester just died in front of me. Now I was looking up at the sky. Please don't take it. Like, I was just like, oh my God, it's happening again. And she was having a seizure fit or whatever. And I picked her up and had her in my arms, and I went, oh, this is probably not a good idea. So then I actually laid her back down, and it just went on for hours. And then I tried to, my phone was inside. So I was going to ring the emergency vets, but I'm the only one there. So I didn't want to leave her, but then my phone was inside. So I stayed with her for a little bit. Then one got the phone and rang the vet. She said, and I knew her personally, and she said, I'm coming down now. I'll meet you at the clinic. So Floss had finished whatever she was finished. I took her down to the vets, and the vet said, oh, she's had a mini stroke. And I was like, oh, is this the end? And she said, no, but it's coming soon. Like it's
Oh,
coming soon.
wow.
And that was really hard for me to instantly, that trauma from Chester of just it being taken away from me in that moment in the sky. I looked up and I was like, please, no, not again. And anyone that knows me, Floss was just through all my divorce and through everything, all three of them, but you had that special connection with that one animal. She was just my everything. Like if I went away for work, she wouldn't eat for 3 days. Like she was a madam.
Oh, Floss.
She was a madam, but it was all about her. And anyway, so for that whole week, she was still eating like crazy, and still her whole body would like shake. So I was always like a little bit worried. I was on edge that whole week because every time her leg shook, it was always shaking. It's like, oh my gosh, she's gonna have another one. It was horrific that whole week. And then I had to go back to work on the Monday, and I thought, I've got to take her in for a checkup. So Maisie and Floss were joined at the hip. Wherever one went, the other one went. So we went to the vets for a checkup. Maisie came with me. And as soon as I walked into the vet looked at me, and we'd already had a conversation that when the time comes, can you tell me? Because I know when she started to age, I couldn't see it. You know how people go, oh, you'll always know the time. You'll know the time. Well, I never knew. So that's just my experience. And I went in there and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, Barbara, her tongue's blue. And it was September, and it was starting to get hot here in Australia. And if you've ever been a pug owner, they can't have really cool temperatures. They can't have really hot temperatures. And when you've had a pug for 12 and a half years, you've nailed that stuff. Like, you know, and when it rains, they don't go outside to the toilet. Like, they are a very special creature. And so I had it down packed. I said to her, she said her blue's tongue. Her tongue is blue. She's finding it hard to get air into her. And I was like, no, it's fine. Like, I know it's hot now. I remember going, I've got the aircon on. She's going to be fine. And she said she went out of the room and got 3 other people came in and went out. She was getting other people's opinions, wasn't she? She knew. I was like, no, it's fine. She's going to be okay. She's all right. It's just pugs always breathe like this. They always pant. And she said, Barbara, I can't let you leave here today. I can't. She said, you know how we had that conversation? She says, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I let you leave with her today. It's her time. And when she put her hand on my shoulder, I went, far out. Oh my God, my world's going to crumble. I hadn't bought any of her blankets. I hadn't bought any of her toys. I hadn't even thought of the thing of saying goodbye to her. Like, it wasn't even on my mind. It was just, this is happening today. And she said, take your time. Just let me know. So I sat on the floor. God, it would have been about 3.5, 4 hours. I don't even know how long. I sat on the floor with her in my arms, just telling her all sorts of stuff. And Maisie was lying right next to me. Yeah. And it got to the point where I yelled out to the vet, you're going to have to, like, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. You're going to have to come and do it. And she came into the room and she had and I hadn't been through any of this before. Obviously, Chester just went like that. So she had all these needles lined up, and obviously my face, she was like, oh, we've just got this just in case. Like, we always have extras just in case the animal doesn't pass straight away or something. And then she goes, oh, have you not been through this before? And I said, no. And so she just gave me the rundown. Some animals may cry, some animals may scream out, and that was just, hearing all of this was just traumatic for me. Some of them cry out, some of them scream, some of them do funny breathing, some of them look like they're coming back to life, some of them wee and poo themselves, like all this stuff. And I was like, oh my, and then all of a sudden a numbness came over me. It was just, I couldn't talk, I couldn't think, and this whole numb. I'll never forget it. I was just so numb everywhere. And she's like, okay. I said, well, we've got to do it. And then I had her in my arms, and the vet started to bawl, like lose it. And she's been a vet for 35 years. And I said to her, oh my God, what's happened? And she said, Floss just looked at me and told me it's time. And I felt a bit ripped off because I was kind of like, well, why can't I see that? But when you see a vet who does this all day, every day, say that the dog had told her it's time, I was like, okay. And she's doing a hold her. And I said, no, I didn't know if I was going to collapse into a ball, if I was going to like rock insanely or want to hit my head against it. Like, I didn't know in this moment what I was going to do. So the vet nurse actually had her sitting up on her knee. So she was facing me. You can imagine a pug sitting there, and she was just facing me. And I was just like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. This is happening. Oh my God. That was just running through my head. This is fucked. I can't believe this is happening. Oh my God, oh my God. And as she got the needle, she didn't tape her up or anything. So it's just such a different experience. She just had her paw and she went to get the needle. And as the needle, I kid you not, hadn't even scraped her skin, she said, oh my God, I'm really sorry, Barbara, she's gone. So it might have been just the insertion of the needle or whatever. And in that moment, I was like, I just looked at Floss and she just looked at me. And within that moment, I saw a white gush of steam or white gush of swirly stuff go like fly up to the ceiling. And I went, holy fuck, what was that? I was like, and then I looked at her and her body just like the air out of a balloon just went, oh. And they laid her down and I went, oh, what just happened? And they obviously left the room. And as she was lying before they left, she was lying on this beautiful purple blanket and her color changed instantly. You know, she was a fawn pug, but it went real apricot and brown really quick. And because pugs are really roly, her eyes, it was like I couldn't see her eyes. So it was really nice because most animals, their eyes are open when they pass, which can be confronting. I let Maisie off the lead and Maisie sniffed her and Maisie lay right next to her. Tell you what, one of the best things I've ever done, how that it would have happened with Maisie there anyway, but as like how I've experienced it, if two animals are very close, it was really great that Maisie could watch Floss pass away because she knew where she was going. She never walked around the house looking for her. She saw it happen.
Yes.
Really glad that happened that way. Like,
yes.
You know. And so as that happened, and we're all like, everyone was crying. There's quite a few people in the room at this stage. And I said, what a beautiful dog. Like, she didn't cry out. Nothing happened. It was just so peaceful. Oh, and she didn't even poo herself. Like, I remember going, oh my, and all of a sudden, and everyone started laughing and went, Floss. And you just got this waft of poo. Like, her timing was impeccable. It was like, oh my God.
Perfect.
Like, she didn't even do anything. And you couldn't see it because they covered the blanket, but you could smell a little bit. And it was just her little moment of going, I'm the queen.
Queen Floss.
Yeah.
Queen Floss.
She's going out in style. And that was kind of the second time. So that was very different for me. And 48 days ago was different again. And it hits you differently. And the bonds, as you say goodbye to each one, the bond between me and Maisie was so tight. And this time, I thought I was going to lose her when Floss passed. When Floss passed, she wouldn't move. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't drink. She didn't want to live. From that moment, she got severe gut issues, pancreatitis, colitis, just had severe health issues. Then, this is weird, a year to that date of Maisie having that stroke, to the hour, Maisie was underneath my desk and I was actually writing a Facebook post to say, hey Floss, Maisie and I miss you and all this stuff because that grief was so raw. Obviously, like I shared with you guys, I didn't want to be here anymore. So I was sharing all this. All of a sudden, Maisie kicked off under my desk at the exact same time. She's had a seizure. But Maisie is a vocal dog. So when she has a seizure, she cries out. And it is the most horrific. Any owner, I'm really sorry if you've ever had to experience this with any of your animals. It is the most, seeing a dog have a seizure, I don't wish that on anyone. Having a dog having a seizure that cries out why they have it, so she was underneath my desk and it happened pretty quick. I would say a few seconds. And I looked under to the point of what just happened? What was that? I think that was a seizure. And so I took her down to the vets and the vet, God, they did tests after tests. She had an ultrasound on her tummy again. They couldn't see anything. And they were like, you know what? Sometimes dogs just have seizures out of the blue, you know? And I was like, And then she got tests, and this one vet said, look, there's a thing called Cushing's. We have to do a separate blood test for this. I knew nothing about it at this time. And then obviously her results came back that she had Cushing's disease, which basically means in simple terms, her body is so stressed out and produces so much cortisol that it eats away at all their organs. And they're in a highly stressed state all the time, which means some dogs, they lose hair on their back. Some dogs have a really pot belly appearance. Some dogs just drink so much water because they just feel like they're thirsty all the time, and they have a voracious appetite, but it eats away all their organs. Maisie had no presenting signs and never had her whole time. But what happened is after she got diagnosed, we didn't put her on medication straight away, and about a week later, she didn't move. She didn't want to move. She didn't want to eat, and she started to get really skinny. And the vet said it's a really taboo subject with medication with Cushing's. The medication that she was on, called Veterol or Trilostane, that is what gave her diabetes, and that was the final thing for her. But it saved her, as in she wasn't eating, she wasn't living a life, she wasn't moving. And then as soon as we put her onto this medication, which is very strong, it took her a couple of months. Like one day I found her hiding in the corner, shivering and shaking. Like this is the stuff as a pet owner, when you have a sick dog, you go through these things, you've got to try these medications. You look for the herbal, you look for the natural way. But for this disease, because it was so strong in her body, we had to go down the medication route. And so she was on that. And then she came a bit better. And then after a while, she started to get UTIs all the time. And then she started to have, it's always like at 2:00 in the morning. She had a really loud seizure about 2:00 in the morning, to the point where she made all the dogs in the neighborhood bark. And my neighbor next to me said, God, we heard screaming the other night. And I said, yeah, that was Maisie had a seizure. And we had to drive up to Sydney to a emergency hospital, which was probably, I want to say, a 2-hour drive. That was the closest. So I had to go in the middle of the night up there, get all that sorted. And then she had one, and then that she stayed with all the girls. And typical Maisie, none of my animals could be in cages. So every time they rang me, they're like, oh, I hope it's okay. All the girls are passing her around and giving her a cuddle. We don't normally do this, but Maisie didn't like being in the cage. And I was like, that's fine,
Aww.
And then a little while later, then she got on seizure medication. And then little after that, like I'm obviously compressing the story, she had 2 seizures again in the middle of the night, one close to the other. And I know when they're clusters, that's not good. Yeah. So this was during COVID and stuff. Oh, and in there, she had a massive leg surgery in there during COVID. So we got that all sorted, my little wonder dog. And then she had I was worried that she had something going on in her brain, because with Cushing's, it's either down in their like liver or down in their stomach area, or it's in their head by their brain. And because she had a couple of seizures now, I was thinking, oh my God, she's the dog that will never complain. I scraped all my money together because it was an MRI or a CT scan. I couldn't get the full-blown MRI because by this time I'm just hemorrhaging. Her medication alone was about $500 a month. Like it was just... And then her seizure medication on top of that. And then I got her on some joint medication. And then every 2 weeks we were at the vet, not because I'm a hypochondriac pet parent, but because I knew her so well and her disease was pretty full on. If I noticed anything, she'd go down and check. So, yeah, we did all that. And her MRI... Like I was like, okay, it's going to be a brain thing, prepare yourself. And then the lady said, oh my God, Maisie's lovely. Hope you don't mind. We've took her out of the cage. She's getting cuddles by everyone. We don't normally do this. And I said, no, that's fine. You can come and get her. Her head's clear. And I was like, just spent thousands of dollars to say, so that first scan that got done of her tummy, it got missed. It was down there. It wasn't in her head. So this whole time I was thinking it was in her head with all these seizures. She got this scan. Anyway, so you imagine you go through having a sick animal, you do all these tests, and then on top of this, when a dog has Cushing's, when you want to keep it under control, you actually do a I'm going to get it wrong, I should know it by now, ATCH stimulation test, which is a different blood test where they test the blood, then they put cortisol in it and then test it again. Anyway, that's about $450, $500 a time as well. And so we had to go get all those tests done, right? And the vets became my second family. They knew us really, really well. And then how it started was Maisie started to 48 days ago. I noticed that she got 3 bloody UTIs back to back. When I'm talking bloody, there was blood pouring out of her bits. And I was like, oh, this is not good. And they did all the checks. It's just with her Cushing's, it's just a severe UTI. So I had to see all that. And I was like, oh, this is not good. And then one day she got up 48 days ago and there was a little wet patch. And I went, oh no, incontinence. That's probably not good. And I left it for a day. It didn't happen. Then the next day it happened again. So I took her down and the vet, I think he knew. He was like, look, it could be she needs stronger medication for her Cushing's. Before we do all those tests again, let's just do a general bloods, Barbs, and let's see what happens. And he did a general bloods. I'll never forget it because Maisie came everywhere with me. So we went down to the supermarket to get a click and collect, and she was in the car with me. And he took a couple of days. And when he even rang me, I could tell he didn't want to tell me. And dogs in the background at the vets were like, woo, 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 woo. And he was like, shut up. Because I was like, whoa, okay. And I pulled over and he said, oh, it's not good, Barbs. And I was like, oh, right, okay. And he said, her glucose levels are sky high. They're about 400 and they're meant to be under, God, I can't remember the numbers now, under 12 or something. Like, I don't know. I'm messing the numbers up, but he goes, I can't believe nothing has happened. She hasn't passed away or had a stroke. Like, this is really severe. And I was like, cool, what can we do? He gave me all of these options and I was like, yep, we're going to do them all. I don't want to say goodbye to her unless we've done all these options. And then before I went, he goes, no, you need to come down today. And he goes, she's got diabetes. You need to inject her every day. And I was like, oh, I've never used a needle. He's like, I'm working late. Come down at 6, bring Maisie. I'll show you how to draw a needle. I'll show you how to inject her. And that for me was like, oh my God. So I went down, learn how to inject. That's horrific in itself. And you have to get the level so correct. Even in a really healthy animal, diabetes can be quite hard to manage.
Yes.
And every time I would inject her, that whole week before she passed, I would just say, Maisie, medication. And she'd just sit there and bow her head and just sit there for me. Like, she was
good girl.
The sweetest dog. And the vet, bless him, had the best conversation with me ever. And he just said, look, Barbs, we're basically putting corks in holes at the moment. She's a very sick dog. That was the first time that I knew that she was in my area. They own 3 vet clinics. She was the top dog with Cushing's as in the most sick. I thought it was just the disease. And he said, no, Barbara, sometimes dogs with Cushing's, we see them once or twice a year. That's it. Not every second or third week. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. And he said, look, we can do all this testing, but he said, where it's at now is things can change really quickly. And he goes, I know you've been traumatized by your other 2 times of saying good. I must have mentioned it to him. He says, I'm mindful that I know how close you are. Don't want this to traumatize you again. So he said, from my opinion, and again, I'd had the conversation. I must be so intuitive. I had the conversation with him 6 weeks before this. I kid you not. And I said to him, hey, and I cried. And I said, and how uncomfortable. It's so, if anyone's been in a vet room before and you've cried in front of your vet, why do we say sorry? Like when and because I'm a counselor and I do it for a job, I'm very comfortable around people crying to me, but I still struggle in front of like a vet or a doctor if I was to cry. And I said to him, I'm really sorry. And he was and I said to him, doesn't bother you, does it? He says, it's okay, I'm here for you. And that made it really comfortable. But he just said, look, it's come to the time where if you knew a loved one was going to be in a fatal car accident and you could stop it, would you? And those words, and he just said, look, from any time now, we're looking at she could be okay some days, okay, not some days. She could have a heart attack and die. She could just have a stroke and die. She could have a very traumatic, painful death in the middle of the night. He goes, I don't know what way this is going to go. So I went home, and then I just had something in me was I want to give it a week and say goodbye. I booked it at a point. I didn't want to do it. To that day, I didn't want to do it. No, there's no way. Didn't want to do it. And I got a friend to take me, and it was the most horrific thing. but I had people there that knew her and cared for her that whole time. They all came and said goodbye. And the thing is, it was so scary when you have to say goodbye to an animal, because that whole primal instinct took over me. Like, I had her in my arms, and when they went to do it, I just, and I want to pause for a moment, because if this is too much for someone, I want them to stop, because it may trigger but if we keep apologizing for the way we say goodbye to our animals, and if it triggers someone, we're not going to help other people too. So I've got to share this thing, as painful as it is. And I went to this place, and this place was fear, and it wasn't for me, but I screamed. Like, it wasn't screaming out, but it was a noise. It was a real primal noise. And it was, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. I remember just saying, I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's happening. I'm so scared. I remember reaching out to the vet and holding his arm, the poor guy. Like, I was just like, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. Like, something like that. See, my brain's already blocked what I actually said. And it was only a few weeks ago. But I remember being just, something overtook me in that moment. It was different to all the other times. It was just like, I'm so scared. It was for her, and I'm so scared, and it's death. And she was I didn't even mean to have her in my arms, but the poor bugger, I had her like scooped in my arms, and I had my head down. He started to tear up. My best friend was crying. And later on, like, having someone with you in that moment is really comforting, because they can replay things back that you miss. So yes. She was able to tell me that in that moment of that really heavy time for me, the reason why they both teared up, and my vet was very emotional, she was looking up at me as she was passing. And I didn't know, because I had my head down in her. And then I had this instinct of, oh my God, like, because I'm pretty I was like, oh my God, I'm squeezing the poor thing. I just better lay her down. I didn't realize she had already gone. So as I lay her down, her whole body flopped. And then I freaked out. Oh my God. And then soon realized that she had passed, and we wrapped her up in the blanket, and she was still Maisie. Like, that was a really nice moment for me. I remember just in that really split second, I saw her. It was still Maisie, and I didn't have to see any more seizures. And it was just, and my friend said when they have a tube of whatever they have, the euthanasia to put in, they always do extra. But one of the signs of when a dog passes, if they start putting the stuff into their little bodies and they go really quickly, it means that they're very sick. And she said it hadn't even been a quarter, and the vet looked up at my friend, and they nodded. I didn't see any of this, and so that gave me a bit of peace too. That that your animal's sick, but it's so hard to comprehend and let go. And as she lay there. And it's why it's so important to get a vet that listens to you and really, and even before it happened, I said, mate, one last time, can we do anything? Like, I really pushed her. I said, you sure there's nothing we can do before? And he said, no. So, I wasn't afraid to ask questions and to be silly and to just say what was on my heart, because I didn't want to regret anything. And then as she lay there, I gave him a big hug, and we cried together. And he said, you know what, Barbs? He goes, thank you for listening to me. He goes, I cannot begin to tell you the amount of times, he said, I probably don't say it as blunt as I said it to you, but he says the number of times I guide the patients, parents and stuff to, hey, look, it might be time, because they can't tell you that it's got to be your own thing, but it's possibly time to say goodbye. And he says, easily you could have chosen not to listen to me, because even Maisie was happy. She was still barking. She was still eating. I know she wasn't herself, but she was still Maisie. And he said that people don't listen to me. I see them back the next day, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, absolutely traumatized by the animal passing at night or something. Like, he goes, thank you for listening to me. And it was just like, oh, that was just that confirmation, like, Barbara, I did the right thing, and I had the right person by my side, and it made the most traumatic day of my life, one of the most traumatic days of my life, a little bit easier to swallow.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can see that each time my animal has passed from someone that didn't even want animals, how much they I built my life around them, how much that I get it. An animal is your life. It is your family. It is your constant. It's your routine. It's your, it becomes part of your soul. And so each one I know took a piece of my heart, and it's never grown back. And I'll never be the same person again either.
No.
Every time it happens, you lose part of yourself, but also you learn. So the spiritual stuff was seeing Floss's spirit or whatever it was. And with Maisie passing, certain things happened. And I'm open to possibilities, but I'm someone that would never think I'd have a podcast talking about it. And here we are.
What's it like for you having just told these 3 life stories? I mean, this is incredible to share so openly, to normalize for everybody listening these different types of experiences, to talk about wrestling with these end of life decisions. What's it like for you right now having just shared this with us?
It feels a little bit It's so interesting because the whole time I was thinking I'm talking too much. I've got Beth here on my podcast. I'm talking about how I said goodbye to my animals. The human condition. I'm already apologizing for myself as I'm saying the story. Where how many times do we get a moment that someone like yourself sits there and is present, is interested in what I've got to say? Because no one in my life has really been interested to hear about my 3 my 3 animals. Sorry, Chester, I just called you a dog. But no one's been interested because they've meant so much to me. So I've never really given myself grace to even share that for a really long time. So it feels really nice to honor them and to know that through this, I'm going to help so many people.
And I have to ask, having gone through 3 very different losses, 3 very different relationships, you must feel like you have so much wisdom. As much of a wilderness as grief is, and it's different every time, you must also feel like you have so much to offer in terms of helping others through this. I mean, it's one of the reasons you're doing this. What are some of your wisdom points? What are some of your takeaways from all of this?
Everyone's different. So, and you feel a little bit guilty because I've had 3 different animals and I've loved them all differently. And now it's interesting because Maisie's almost on par with Floss, which I can't believe I'm saying that. But, you know, I love Chester and he was awesome. But you feel a little bit of guilt when you have more than one animal and you've got to share that love and you love them differently. And when they pass, something I'd like people to know is it's okay to grieve really differently. So with Floss, I still, even to this day, it's been 4.5 years, I still can't really watch videos of her and stuff because I can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
That loss is just, every time I think about it, it feels like someone's kicked my heart. Like it's just that, I'm tearing up thinking about it now. It's just that really deep grief. And you just think it's such a deep loss. Where with Maisie, as soon as she passed, even last night, I've grieved and stuff, but it's such a sneaky little thing because this grief is so different and it's lighter. And I don't mean, it just feels lighter for me. But in moments when I was like mopping the floor last night, I just had a cry because I'm like, I'm never going to hear her pitter-patter of her feet or her little footprints in the floor. And then I was watching videos of her and I was just laughing and crying and laughing. And that's just so different to my other animal. So every time you have to say goodbye to your little beloved, you're in a different stage in life. So sometimes like those 3, and especially the last 2 came to me for the different country. They've seen me go through hard times in my life, through a marriage. And when I said goodbye to Maisie, I had a moment of reflection, was like, I've had a dog for 17 years, but then I've had an animal for 20 years of my life. I've got a beautiful cat now, Coda. We need to say hi to Coda because
Coda.
That's the other thing too, is what I notice is saying goodbye to each animal. The animals that are left behind, that's a whole nother podcast in itself, is about
grieving
pets.
Yes.
And Maisie howled. I remember when Chester went And she was such a young puppy then. She was looking for him a little bit. And I remember the groomer, might have been 2 weeks or so after Chester passed, the groomer, and I was really close with her. She rang me and she said, can you come and be with Maisie? Because Maisie was howling and she was getting groomed. And Maisie, I posted it the other day on my stories. Maisie cried and it really freaked me out. So the night before we said goodbye to Floss, I've got a photo of Maisie and her paws around Floss's neck and nuzzling into her. And she looked up and she was, her eyes were all swelled up with water. And then she had tears coming down her face. And she did the same. I got a photo of it 2 or 3 days before she passed, and I put it on Instagram the other day, and I got so many messages going, oh my God, Barbara, that just broke my heart. And it was the same when I was telling her how much I love her and how much I'm going to miss her. She looked at me, her eyes swelled up, and she cried again. And I was like, how do you put words into that? But I know each animal that I had, when one passed, the other one severely struggled. And I know when my pug went and then Maisie, it was just her and I, the dynamics change, your routine changes. Even simple things like their beds and stuff are still there. Like, no one prepares you for that. No one prepares you. Like, how do you help the other animal? Because your other animals, and now Coda, he, I've let a lot of things slide because I know he's been crying too.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, no one talks about this much. It's a big piece in my work, of course, because many of the people I work with have multiple animals. And I had another cat when Arnie died, and she's still here. She's 19 years old, Zelda, hanging on.
Hey, Zelda.
And, I am very open about Zelda is not my favorite. Zelda was not my favorite. Zelda will never be my favorite. Arnie was my favorite. And just as we grieve them each differently, we love them each differently. And that's okay too. I really want to normalize that for people because there's no point in spending time feeling guilty because you have a deeper relationship with one animal over another. But nevertheless, we do need to help support our surviving animals, and they are confused. And even if they are able to be present, which is lovely, I'm glad you had that experience. Many people don't get that experience. It was, I desperately wanted Zelda to be able to say goodbye to Arnie, and the way his situation unfolded, he was unsafe to transport, so we couldn't get him home. But we have to really think about how we're supporting our surviving animals and things we can do to provide them reassurance and safety and routine and acknowledge their grief and get them checked medically because many animals do develop symptoms, physical grief symptoms, just like we do. So it's a huge topic and something that I work with people on. And some people say, oh, am I making this up? I feel like my animal's grieving. I said, you're not making it up at all. They're not only are they grieving the animal, even if they weren't close, Zelda and Arnie were not particularly close, but there was grief there for her. But also these animals are in a house where we're all grieving, where you're grieving. So even if they aren't, feeling one type of way about it, you are bringing your grief to the room every time. And that's an adjustment. So I like to, help support people with that. But I also like to say, especially if the surviving animal is not the favorite or not the soulmate animal, to allow this to be an opportunity to give that animal their own time to blossom, to unfold, to bring you different gifts. There's a phenomenon that I have just seen anecdotally many, many times where sometimes the surviving animals take on the traits of the animals who have passed. Did that happen to you at all? Did you notice? Did Maisie take on any of Floss's? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So with Maisie and Floss, Pug snorts a lot and snorts and snores and grunts. And so all of a sudden, when she passed, Maisie at nighttime started to snore. And that was so bizarre.
Yes. Yeah, but that's real. That is a proven phenomenon. This has happened over and over again. We need a name for it. Has someone done the research on this? I don't know about the research, but this happens over and over. And sometimes it's unsettling, sometimes it's comforting, sometimes it's hilarious, and many people have experienced that. And so I think it's also a reminder for us, in addition to helping them grieve, it's like helping them blossom, helping them, step into their own in a new way. your surviving animal will change, but very, very many times it's a positive change that people
Yeah.
experience. And that is something that I also like to point out to people because they're so concerned about the grief and so concerned that their animal may not, recover from it. But at the same time, even Zelda really came out of her shell and really relished sort of her position in the household
That's
after
right.
Arnie died.
Yeah.
And that's a positive, it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
And I can resonate with that too because I had Chester and then Floss and then Maisie. So Maisie was always number 3 and she was just the most loving dog where Floss was like, you love me, I'm the queen. But Maisie was just pouring and oozing out unconditional love. And when her best mate Chester went first and then Floss, I knew it was like, that's why I didn't get another animal for ages because I was like, you're my number 1 now and I want you to sit in it and I want it to all be about you. And she, for 2 years, because Floss would always sleep by my head, whether I was married or had a partner or whatever, Floss would always sleep up by my head ever since I had her. And Maisie would always sleep at the bottom of the bed. That was just the rules. And it took Maisie 2 years. She would sleep down the bottom. And then one day, because I looked at my calendar and it was about 2 years, she's like me, when you get into bed, I just flop my head onto the pillow. And she does the same. And this one particular night, she flopped onto the pillow next to me. And I went, oh my God, you're sleeping next to me. And it took her 2 years without me realizing, slowly moving up to her being there. Yeah. Thank you for listening to the first episode, my chat with Beth. I'm going to add another episode now. We talk for another hour we continue the conversation about pet grief and my experience with it, but also after saying goodbye to my animals, the experiences I had, what struggles and obstacles I came across, and I'd love to share these with you. So please join Beth and I as we continue this conversation over on episode 2. I would love to have you there.